theme, and I'd like to invite from sharetrails.org the Executive Director, Martin Hackworth.
All right, I'm an old college lecturer, old habits die hard, so I'm going to stand right here at the lectern if that's okay. So I want to talk about a project that's not only shovel ready, but it's ready and has been since 2005. It's something called the Tour of Idaho. Outdoor recreation is somewhere between a $500 million and $1 billion a year industry in Idaho, depending on exactly what you count in terms of outdoor recreation. If you count OHV recreation, then it's close to $1 billion. And the Tour of Idaho was developed in 2005 to help spread some of that wealth around, especially to small communities in the middle of the state that typically have a population of between a few hundred and a few thousand folks. I've spent the last few years as the executive director of sharetrails.org trying to keep trails open, and that's the only thing that we need to keep projects like this going, to make sure that we don't lose access for motorcycles and off-highway vehicles to a lot of the trails that are not right now perfectly legal and that we use. So nobody's built any trails for the Tour of Idaho. This is a project that just connects trails that already exist together into a route that goes the length of the state. So Idaho is a little bit unique in that we really support OHV recreation in the state of Idaho. In fact, if you go to some of the small communities in the middle of the state, you will see more side-by-sides going up and down the street than you see pickup trucks. And in the winter, it's sleds going up and down the center of the street. The Tour of Idaho is unguided. It's a 9-day adventure. It's, depending on the year, somewhere between 1,600 and 1,800 miles in length. And it's a dirt bike ride that goes the length of the state. It's a little bit like a backcountry discovery route. Does anybody know what a BDR route is in here? Okay, so Steve, you do. Backcountry discovery routes are routes for big motorcycles, people that ride things like BMWs, big KTMs. They're motorcycles that can be ridden on pavement and dirt roads and have some limited off-road capability. And there's a whole set of backcountry discovery routes for just about every state in the United States where they've pieced together cool dirt roads that do big loops around the state. Well, the Tour of Idaho kind of does the same thing, except it's mostly single-track trail. This year, the tour is about 1,500 miles in length, and of that 1,500 miles, about 45% of it's trail that's a little bit wider than your front tire. So what are some of the challenges of the tour? Well, first of all, you've got to be able to figure out a way to ride your motorcycle 1,800 miles through the woods, and that's harder than it sounds. The trails are not easy trails for the most part, and even when they are, there's a lot of them. The average day is somewhere around 250 miles in length, and a lot of that's going to be spent in fairly technical terrain. And we have some standards for the tour. It's not a guided adventure, but there are a set of standards for riding the tour that we expect tour riders to adhere to, and one of those is self-support. So you can't have any help along the way. You've got to carry everything that you're going to use, and the only respite from that is every night you're going to spend the night in a town somewhere where we hope you spend a lot of money. We want you to resupply. We want you to make sure you stay in a nice hotel, eat a nice dinner. There are guys that have rolled into a town at night with wheels that weren't round anymore and a motorcycle that was completely shot. And if that town had a motorcycle shop, they bought a new bike and they set out the next day, which was really good for the person that owned that shop. BDR is a pretty sophisticated organization that keeps really good statistics on their riders. We're a little bit more homegrown at the Tour of Idaho, but each of our riders spends at least $1,000 along the way. And the little towns in the middle of the state, places like Chalice and North Fork, they welcome the riders every year with open arms. The tour season starts somewhere in the middle of July every year and goes till about the 1st of October, and it's not really dictated by when the trails legally open and close. It's dictated by Mother Nature, because if any of you have ever spent any time in the Intermountain West, you know that the high mountain passes are typically full of snow until some years in the middle of August. So the earliest you can generally get through is about the 3rd week in July, which means you've got 6 weeks that you could realistically ride the trails. And you don't want to be pushing it too late into late September or early October, because if you do, the cold weather will get you. Last year, unfortunately, we had our first ever rescue that was necessitated by a guy that was really going lightweight, pushing really hard. He hit 8 inches of wet snow one night with a broken headlight, and he had to be rescued by the local search and rescue authorities. That was the first time in 13 years that anything like that had ever happened. And as something gets more popular, invariably things like that crop up. We also made a really nice donation to the local SAR folks, and they weren't too unhappy about the way that worked out either. So this has been going on for 13 years now. Many, many thousands of people have shown up in the Malad Range in southern Idaho on the Idaho-Utah border where it starts, and exactly 52 people have made it to the Selkirk Range at the other end. So the bailout rate's pretty high. The success ratio is way below 10%, yet people show up year after year to do it again and again. So people show up, they make it through the first 2 or 3 days, they've had all they can take. They come back the next year, they spend another few $1,000s, take another couple weeks off work, come back and they try it again. And the folks that have made it all the way through, pretty small fraternity, 52 people, they come back year after year too because they consider it a life-changing experience. And they come back to help us with the trails. So the trails that we use on the Tour of Idaho are some of the most well-maintained trails in the state. We have guys that'll go out, cut those 8x10 boxes all day long with a chainsaw. We have guys that'll go out with a Pulaski, take the rocks out, make sure that they're flat. And the Tour of Idaho community takes care of the resource that it uses all by itself. We have various merchants along the way who are able to basically perpetuate their business from one year to the next due to the several hundred people a year that we send through some of these small towns, ourselves and the BDR folks. If you were in a place like Elk City, Idaho, which has a population of 100 people, and 300 people come through a year on a motorcycle, they're spending a night in the only hotel, they're eating in the only restaurant, that's a pretty big economic benefit. And all it took was a bunch of people, didn't take any act of Congress or anything else. It took a bunch of guys that ride motorcycles that said, let's see if we can figure out a way to make this work for the people that live in this state. So this year will be the 13th year. The route changes a little bit every year. Our most famous alumnus, a guy named Jimmy Lewis, who is he's won Dakar, he's won Baja a couple of times, came a few years ago and did it, and he actually made a movie of the tour. It's shot with GoPro videos. It's not anything really fancy, but there's a link at the end of my presentation, and if you're interested in seeing what it looks like from a champion level rider's eyes, you can check the link at the end of the presentation. Go there and have a look. None of the riding on this is incredibly hard all by itself. In fact, I have a bunch of kids, and most of my kids have ridden parts of this with me. It's stringing the whole thing together. In fact, that's my son right now. Been riding motorcycles since he's 3 years old, got his license a week ago and crashed his first car within 48 hours. So when I get back home, as soon as I get off that plane, we're gonna have one of these interesting father-son talks. But nonetheless, the tours along the way are a blast. The trails are mostly a blast. They're fun to ride. It's the act of stringing them together for 9 days that makes it a challenge, and that's the reason why not very many people have succeeded. So in wrapping it all up, I'd say that this is a project that a bunch of guys in Idaho got together and said, let's see if we can figure out a way to do something to give back to the people that live in the middle of the state, me especially because I was a college lecturer at Idaho State University for 25 years. Those people paid the taxes that supported my salary. They sent their kids to my classes. And this is my way and my friend's way of doing something to pay those folks back, to send some people into the middle of the state that spend some money and help them get from one year to the next. Thank you.